Good morning, everybody. We want to welcome you to this third session of Air Quality Community of Practice of Latam and African Cities, coordinated by WRI Mexico. This is Ana Cecilia Perales, who is coordinator for air quality. Here we have a vision for climate and clean air with our visions and experiences. Today, we are focused on the design and implementation of action plans integrated for air quality as well as climate change. To begin with, we're going to have an introduction by an expert who will tell us about integrated action plans for air quality and climate change in both Mexico and Spain. And then we're going to have researchers from Spain who will tell us about how to achieve holistic vision for air quality and climate change, sharing, and will share with us Madrid case. By the middle of the session, we're going to have Dr. Beatriz Cárdenas, who is the Director of Air Quality in WRI Mexico, will moderate to have questions and answers by our experts. And after that, from China and Africa, we're going to have information about their experience in advance for the WRI program, as well as air quality program, respectively. Then we're going to have a Q&A session with the members of this community of practice. So now we are going to start with our keynote by Robert Kehew, who is a master's in public policy. He has worked in urban planning he has worked on urban planning projects and municipal finance and development in more than 20 developing countries and the US. In recent years, he developed as leader as climate change planning unit coordinator of cities and climate change. Robert, the floor is yours. Thank you. Anna?
Africa. Let me just share my screen here. So I will be talking about integrated clean air and climate action planning in Madrid and Mexico City. This is work coming out of sabbatical research that I undertook several years ago while at UN Habitat. The full paper is available on request. One benefit of that sabbatical was to interact with top professionals on this topic. And indeed, I met both Beatriz Cárdenas of WRI and our other panelist, Rafael Borge of Madrid during that work. So let me talk briefly about why integrated planning at the city level, types of integration or levels of integration, and then take a high-level look at practices of integrating air quality and climate action planning in Madrid and Mexico City, and then try to offer some initial conclusions and recommendations. One important caveat, a humble note, is Beatriz Cárdenas certainly knows much more intimately the story of Mexico City, and Rafael knows much more intimately the story of Madrid than I do. If this presentation has value, I think, though, it is comparing side by side these two experiences, for indeed the two cities have taken different routes to try to integrate the climate and clean air action agendas. And so that can, I think, provoke thought about how we in our different cities try to integrate these two important agendas. But for detailed information on the two case studies, we are fortunate to be able to look to Beatriz and Rafael for more information. Well, first, why should we consider integrated planning? Why not just have separate clean air action plans and separate climate action plans at the city level? Well, there are calls from different organizations to integrate these two agendas. For example, if we look to Asia, the Clean Air Asia argues that co-controlling air pollution and greenhouse gases will be more effective than targeting each one individually. And if we look at the various calls for integrating these two agendas, we do see three main reasons why we should do this. The first reason is to try to identify more optimal measures. this chart shows this, that certainly there are many measures we can take in cities that will work both to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also improve air quality. They're shown in the upper right quadrant of this little graphic. These would be activities such as increased energy efficiency or moving to renewable energy sources. But not all actions will both benefit air quality and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Some may benefit air quality, but actually hurt, result in more greenhouse gas emissions, and vice versa. Promoting the use of diesel is often presented as one example of an action that, while it may somewhat reduce greenhouse gas emissions compared to other fossil fuels used in vehicles, this can hurt a city's air quality. So one reason to integrate these two agendas is so we don't miss those. We promote one agenda at the expense of the other. A second reason would be we can work more efficiently if we combine these. Why should we have two plans instead of one? Why should we carry out two inventories instead of one integrated inventory? So it's just with scarce resources at a city level, it makes sense to combine these two agendas. And a third reason could be to build and sustain political support for mitigation action. The benefits of reducing greenhouse gas emissions will be felt on a global scale. But the benefits of taking air quality action are much more immediate and help local citizens. So perhaps if we combine these two agendas, that will help maintain political support for environmental action. But how easy is it in practice to integrate clean air and climate action plans? This is a little graphic that suggests some different levels of integration. The top of this chart shows air quality, and the bottom of this chart shows climate change mitigation. And starting from the left side, a first step would be no integration of these two agendas. We have a separate clean air action plan and a separate climate mitigation plan, and they don't really relate to each other at all. The next step, though, would be cross-reference of activities when, while there are still two separate plans, at least they're talking to each other. They reference each other and maybe complement the actions. Then the third step is when we start to integrate two plans, but maybe we don't fully do it. Maybe there's some lip service given to integration, but if you dig really deeply into the plan, it's not integrated. And then the fourth level would be full integration. We can quibble about whether there's a basic or an advanced version of integration, but I think that's not really the time to go into that right now. So I'm going to just, I did develop some talk on this, but I'm just going to skip over that for now. We can get back to that if need be, and go on to taking a look at, let's go to Madrid and take a look at how they've been integrating the climate and clean air action agendas. This is a chart that shows Madrid's main plans that they've developed over the past nearly 20 years to try to address either air quality or climate change. A number of years, those were two separate streams of planning activity. But then in 2016, and Dr. Borge on our call right now was very involved in this exercise, developed a very innovative plan A for air quality and climate change that really does try to fully integrate these two agendas. So let's take a little focus on plan A and see some of the details of this. For one thing, we see that plan A does give equal weight, fairly equal weight throughout to air quality and climate change mitigation. This is at the level of objectives. For example, there's a clear air quality objective to comply with national European legislation for air quality. And there's a clear mitigation goal to reduce total greenhouse gas emissions by more than 40% compared to 1990 levels. But we can see one interesting difference between these two objectives. Just looking at the level of plan objectives, the target for air quality was set only 4 years in the future, from 2016 to 2020. And while the mitigation target was set for 2030. And this reflects the political economy realities that the city was facing, that with Madrid exceeding emissions standards particularly for nitrogen dioxide, I believe, in the European community, there was a real risk of legal action against Spain and by extension to Madrid to comply with these levels. So there was some real urgency in air quality, whereas in mitigation, it was urgent, but not quite as urgent. And there was perhaps more of a desire to align more with the National Climate Action Plan, the Nationally Determined Contribution, or NDC, of Madrid. And so there is already a difference. Both of these objectives are quantitative, they can be measured, but there is a difference in timeline. And there was there was analytic support given to the prioritization process. It was an iterative process. Let's look at a set of actions and see if they will help us meet our goal, or if not, what actions are the most effective, what new actions do we need. And these estimates were considered preliminary estimates of the effect that the main measures might have in terms both of nitrogen dioxide and CO2. So looking again at impact in both of these areas, but looking at emissions, not trying to go any further into ambient air quality or how it would look geographically in the city. This was considered a first step in defining an ambition level and picking the measures that were going to be used. It was so again, these preliminary estimates were done in terms of emissions. It was only when a final set of measures had been arrived at that and again, Rafael was led this effort, did modeling of ambient air concentrations of several key pollutants, how it would affect different parts of the city, and taking at least a qualitative look at the health impacts of those concentrations. Whereas on the side of mitigation, it was the modeling of the final set of emissions was done in terms of emissions using the very helpful CO2 equivalent yardstick, and looking at this by sector. So that's a very quick look at Madrid. Now let's take a equally broad brush overlook at Mexico City. And again, we see over the past more than 20 years, we see that originally there was a stream of air quality plans that were developed at the top half of this slide, and a series of strategies and programs done for climate change mitigation or climate action. And the one very interesting difference already, though, at this point is that the climate change work was done at the city scale, whereas the air quality work was done at the metropolitan scale. So this makes us aware that two different local government organizations or administrations are working on these two different topics, and they're working at different scales. So we're going to, the one where we see the most integration of the clean air and the climate agenda is in this set of strategies and programs, local strategy for climate action and its corresponding program. And this is for Mexico City. So the city had very strong support, and Beatriz was very involved in this and can speak to this with much more detail. But just to give a broad brush overview, this strategy and program have an integral treatment of greenhouse gases, as we would expect in a climate action plan, but also looking at black carbon, and not all the full range of different pollutants, but focusing in on black carbon. And in fact, the strategy doesn't speak about greenhouse gases, but about greenhouse substances, novel language within the climate community. And so let's look at how it did integrate black carbon into the climate agenda. So it did set goals by 2020, and the goals were expressed in terms of reduced emissions from business as usual. There were separate goals set for greenhouse gases as a whole and black carbon with a separate goal. And this is while there have been efforts to extend the concept of CO2 equivalent to include black carbon, this has not been maybe fully tested or widely accepted in the climate community yet. So there were separate goals set here. Now, maybe one thing to mention just before I go on here, just stepping back one step. Why only look at black carbon? Why not look at other air pollutants? And I think there's an important reason here that goes back to the an important administrative reason. You don't want to step on other people's turf, and it could be that if Mexico City developed a fully integrated climate and clean air action plan, maybe there could be objections at the metropolitan scale that this is outside of their mandate, and so it's very carefully done just to include black carbon, which does indeed has a greenhouse gas effect, even though black carbon is only in the environment for a matter of days or perhaps weeks, not for a matter of years or decades or centuries, as in the case of the different greenhouse gases. So there was analytic support to decide, well, which set of actions should we include in this plan? This was a very sophisticated exercise that Mexico City did, and innovative, really. They didn't stop just at looking at emissions or stop even at the level of ambient air quality. They did an analysis of cost efficiency, and moreover, they were looking at social benefits, something really going beyond what a normal cost benefit study will look at in many cases. And this includes rough estimates of the effect of improved air quality on health and productivity. Here is a very innovative graphic at the center of the Mexico City strategy and program for climate action. A social benefits curve, and an attempt to quantify the social benefits, including in terms of health and productivity of different actions. This is a tool to help decision makers try to pick what are the most important actions to take to include in a plan. And this is an advanced decision-making tool, I think we would say. And the final program includes 69 measures, 14 of which are expected to help mitigate both greenhouse gases and black carbon emissions. So that's a very quick tour of of those two cities. Let's see if we can start to draw a couple of conclusions and recommendations from this. On the one hand, it may be more complicated to try to develop an integrated climate change and air quality plan. Maybe that's more complicated than developing two separate plans. But the reasons for this, it may help to maintain political support for climate action. It may use scarce human resources and financial resources more efficiently. And it may help us avoid selecting actions that reduce greenhouse gases but hurt air quality. If a city wants to go down that route, a first important step is to obtain high-level political support for integrating the climate mitigation and clean air planning processes. Particularly if these have already been assigned to two different departments, or there are two different processes underway, this really takes high-level political support to try to integrate them. As substantive or technical officials, we have to clearly explain the benefits of trying to integrate these two agendas. In some cases, developing a cross-department planning task force might be a way to help two different parts of a local government collaborate on an integrated plan. For the planning cycle, consider integrated inventories of emissions of air pollutants and greenhouse gases. I know both Beatriz and Rafael can speak very interestingly about this topic. If we just look at, if we're comparing different measures to include in a plan, it's a great start to look at just emissions, but it doesn't fully give the full picture. It's more challenging to try to model the effect of different measures on ambient air quality, but this should give a more accurate, complete picture of the benefits of different alternative.
Robert, 1 minute, please.
Thank you. Some important measures can only be undertaken at the metropolitan scale. Can this be done in your locale? Worth exploring, I think. And maybe a final thought, just as here, maybe now to WRI, is that this is an opportunity for collaboration with partners and joint fundraising. This is an area that WRI has worked in. You mentioned UNEP. UN Habitat has certainly developed work here. Can we explore some joint fundraising on this topic? Thanks very much.
Muchas gracias, Robert.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you so much. So now we're going to have Dr. Rafael Borge, who is a doctor. He has a PhD on climate modeling. He will tell us about air quality, sharing with us Madrid's case. So Rafael, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for your kind introduction. Thank you so much for the invitation as well. I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay, so this is a little to tell you about Madrid's case vision. This is the proposition that we have for the integration of Madrid's plans against climate change and air quality. This is a little of what Robert Kehew has already introduced to us, Plan A, which is probably the most interesting aspect of the plan. And in this sense, I want to say the same as Robert has already told us, the policy for air quality as well as climate change in Madrid, these have followed separate paths up to very recently in 2016 through Plan A. We tried to bring them together, and by the first time ever, we tried to give a coherent vision to both of them together, despite the fact that there's been atmospheric policies in Madrid very much pressured, as Robert told us, based on air quality legislation, as it is for Europe. For example, the critical aspect for Madrid has always been compliance of yearly limit values that shall never be above 40 micrograms cubic micrograms. But if we think about GHG, if we think about this, we have to consider a much broader legislative perspective. There's always national, as it has been for climate change and clean sources of energy, or the law that we currently have regarding climate change and power transition that is bringing us to the year 2030. Although recently there's been an influence, top-down influence, we have seen modifications created by certain international initiatives that consider different paradigms where we take advantage of other institutional frames, but at the same time, we try to reinforce local policies, as it would be the mayor's pact and other measures that will help us mitigate climate change. Why are these different? Robert has also told us we have different administrations involved, we have different ambition levels, and I think deep down they are not different, but they seem to be different. And also we have different temporal and spatial scales that are relevant. So certain things that are very important, as it would be local reduction from the climate change, they are very, very useful, but other options make work better. So in order to illustrate our case, and if I am allowed, I will introduce you to some specific results for Madrid from our local inventory. This is a tool that has turned out to be very important, as Robert told us, relying on local inventories in integrating both things. In this case, we have IMEPS and EEA platforms. This is from the Colombian Air Quality Agency, and these are compatible with the climate change intergovernment parliament. So in Madrid, on a yearly basis, we have a local inventory made. And this is something that we have combined with an air quality modeling system that has photochemical pictures, and then fed by the inventory with meteorology corresponding, we are able to get air quality estimates. If we have this tool, we are very well positioned to obtain a global vision, and mostly a consistent vision regarding the problems that we have in our city. For example, at this specific example, these are our city's measurements. We have, of course, other local information, but in this case, this is an overview for the whole city. This is NO2 mean concentrations. As we said earlier, this is the main problem to our city. This is PM concentration. In this case, this is 2.5. This is the most relevant pollutant that affects our health. And then we have total GHG emissions equivalent to CO2 direct and indirect. For example, here we have emissions associated to power consumption, or electricity in this case. So in this case, we get to see how NO2 issue gets totally dominated by road traffic. So in this case, we have to think about measurements that will allow us to reduce somehow traffic to be reduced. And with this, will not probably reduce only this locally, but regionally, because this is not Madrid's problem. This is a problem for the whole metropolitan area. Madrid and all municipalities around it. It has 3.5 million people living, but in the metropolitan area, in the whole metropolitan area, we have over 5 million people, and compared to Mexico City, it's still a very small city, but we are talking about totally different scales. And on the other side, if we get to see this, for example, if we have the effect of travel reduction, we will have a very direct effect over emissions and NO2 concentrations, but also PM concentration. And this is something that we have not included in our CO2 and equivalent index, as Robert told us, between substances of greenhouse effect and gases of greenhouse effect. We have to consider those, but we have to think that a third of the traffic emissions are black carbon. So black carbon also intervenes in our local measurements. And also cleaner technologies. If we think about cleaner technologies, if we reduce traffic volume or we reduce emissions or emission values based on the technologies now available, we have electrical vehicles, so we are going to have the same effect, although particles will reduce. It is true, because there's an important piece, which is in this case, for example, the electrical vehicles are going to get other sources of energy to get to move. And in this case, we have traffic reduction that can be considered as well. But by having electric vehicles, we will bring a emissions from this area to become indirect emissions. So this will only make sense if mixing the electrical vehicles in these specific countries is very low, because if we compare a life cycle of electrical vehicles in Europe, it would be that for some specific countries, electrical vehicles, they have larger emissions of because in this case, power is produced by coal. So in this case, we're talking about emissions produced by vehicles or by electrical vehicles or by the sources of those electrical vehicles' powers. Now, if we are in charge of reducing emissions, we also have to get into the elicitation center, those that provide power to households or to companies, because in this case, this is so important because this is directly linked to the gas that we use for cooling systems that are also GHG, and another important piece of indirect emissions linked to household power consumption. So in regards to climate change, it is essential that we never forget about household consumption, because this is important also for particle emission, and it is also going to be important in terms of NO2. So this is the basic, and also it is true that urban realities are very complex, and every time more they are thinking about new things or other things. If we think about integration, there is no plan that doesn't consider nature-based solutions. I mean, those options for naturalization or using vegetables or plants or natural resources to improve air quality and climate change mitigation. In Madrid, we are also implementing these actions, and we get to see that this has to be planned as a whole, because we get to see that plants used or vegetation used to improve thermal properties in a city, which is very interesting from the health perspective and from climate change mitigation. This could worsen air quality. We shall never think that one measure will improve air quality if not combined to emission reduction. Plan A or Plan A, as it is said in Spanish. Robert has told us about this. It has these two objectives. We have worked with this iterative objective. At the beginning, we started working with different alternatives, but then we got to our ambition level, something that seemed reasonable to the local authorities. We calculated emissions, and to brief out, I would say that basically we were able to observe a very large impact on NOx by 40%, thanks to the intervention on road traffic. This makes lots of sense if we consider previous analysis. And here we got to see low emissions, and we got to see renewing fleets, and also regulating parking spaces. However, CO2 reductions were very modest. And from the next step viewpoint regarding air quality impact, these are the results. And we brought them into an air quality model to compare 2020 compared to baseline year. So changes are attributed to the measurements applied.
Principales en el PM2,5, muy especialmente en el NO2, y curiosamente el ozono.
In terms of ozone, we were able to get to see how the typical regimes of these different cities, we have experienced reductions of NOx with a slight reduction of O3. And also, besides ozone being a very important pollutant, we need to remember that it is a GHG as well. So later on, we made qualitative analysis of the impact regarding health. regarding mortality rates. And this study told us that this policy, specifically taking everything into account, would prevent over 500 cases of premature mortality. Therefore, it has a very positive impact. It is very asymmetric, as I said earlier, regarding GHG, because these policies deep down are thought specifically or mostly to comply with NOx emissions. So specifically, as it is for Madrid, that depends so much on road traffic. Here we get to see an example. In this case, the labels that we have in Spain, what we call environmental pins, and something that we consider for the traffic authority that in this case, it has these distinctions or stickers for very old vehicles, then not so old vehicles, and then the newest vehicles. And in this case, we know about how clean if these vehicles are, if I'm allowed to use the word clean. So in this case, we're talking about NOx emissions according to the real fleet. It's been calculated by cameras. There's lots of difference between vehicles categories, but in terms of CO2, there is no so large differences. If we talk about zero direct emissions vehicles, the newest vehicles, we get to see we get to see very large difference. So low emission areas, we get to see effects in terms of NOC, NO2 and NOx compared to CO2. And this is the plan. This is the vision. If you want, this is a much later vision for our plan. And we get to see on this chart how the levels of NOx emissions, as we get to see on the blue curve, how this has reduced, as well as NO2 concentration in the city, and the same as it is for CO2 direct and indirect emissions. We get to see that there has been significant reduction from 2008, 2009, and this also relates to our economic crisis and other economical factors. And later on, there's been some reduction from the Plan A implementation viewpoint that started formally in 2016, but we started working with it from 2012. There's been significant reduction, but this is not clear for the last few years. And for direct CO2, in this past 2 years, we have reduced 10%. And this is because this is only what we can control, but there's a very important piece that relates to other factors, as I said, generation mix, power generation mix. And it is true, as it is for Spain specifically, CO2 emissions from power, from electricity, has reduced significantly. So therefore, there is a trend to get support from the city power, from the city electricity. So it will only make sense if we have a national policy for the transition into a power market non-carbon based. Now, in this case for NOx, there is a drastic reduction because all policies have been focused on this, but despite all the efforts in the past few years, we have reduced a little less than 15% our NOx emissions, but we get to see on this chart, concentration levels are not reduced enough. There is no linearity in terms of reducing this and improving air quality due to dispersion, due to photochemical reasons. So that's why this is how we know this is a very important challenge, and we have a very important background. And this is something that we got in 2009 and 2020. We were locked down and our city was paralyzed practically for the first few months of the year due to COVID-19. So these are estimates that we had on how or what these emissions would have been like for a normal year. And in green, we have what really happened.
Tenemos unas reducciones dramáticas tanto en las emisiones de CO2 como de NOx, porque esto no
and it would be the same as it is NOx, because this is not technology related, this is activity related. So what this is telling us is that there are measurements that have very large impact. And on the other side, this is telling us about the very big difficulty of the objectives that we have set, because in this case, when the city was paralyzed with no traffic, we were able to reduce 60% of CO2 CO2 equivalent. And the same as it was for air quality, we achieved very, very big improvement when we were able to reduce emissions caused by traffic. And now, why shall not we consider the same integration? If I'm allowed, we have speculated about this. Madrid continues to integrate its plans, so now they have a new plan, they have a new strategy, a global strategy, and we have a Madrid 60. It has not been fully adopted, but now we have the route map for 2050. And this has, if we consider only the climate objectives, we have to think there would be a 65% CO2 equivalent reduction for the year 2030 compared to 1990. And you get to see the distance between the 2 points. And also we are intending to reach climate neutrality by 2050. This is our proposition. Now, considering this, we may think that probably the best thing to do now is to work according to climate policies, because if we stick to this as ambitious as they are, the same as it was in the past, our climate benefits have come from air quality policies. It would be proper to think that now we're going to have the opposite, but I personally do not think so, because if we consider our commitments and our objectives, air quality objectives, it would call our attention that the WHO has reviewed their guidelines very recently. Therefore, PM 2.5 should be 5. So that means that most of the countries in Europe should reduce 50% mortality rate due to this pollutant. If we consider Madrid in the last 5 simulations that we have made during this year, it turns out to be that to date, for some pollutants, the level has surpassed that proposed by the WHO. So climate change challenges are huge, but air quality challenges are as huge. So that means that we need to change our mindset from deep down, because here we have to consider the European guidelines and also the city's missions or initiatives that Madrid major have joined to decarbonize the city by 2050. And the only thing we need is integration, which is totally different. Of course, we need to integrate both agendas that we were saying previously, but we have to completely change the way we view things, the way we manage this, how different agencies collaborate, from citizens to companies, and how our legislations and administrations work. If we really want to become decarbonized by 2050, we need to radically change. And now, to wrap up and getting back to a nearer reality, as a recommendation, of course, I should say that we have to start by an inventory that integrates in a coherent and consistent manner GHG as well as most relevant pollutants to air quality. And multi-scale models are very, very good, because they allow us to quantify measurements according to the policies and quality of air. And also another recommendation would be that any intervention or plan prior to being properly adopted regarding climate change or air quality, or both together, it is so important that we consider all aspects, as Robert has already mentioned. And simply just to say that from the future viewpoint, we get to see that Madrid, the trends are positive, but we are at the moment where we really have to
realmente llegar a los objetivos que nos estamos planteando, ¿no? Y para eso, pues tenemos que repensar.
Have to rethink not only the way we do policies, the way we do business, the way we live, the way we consider our planet, our cities, and all that. And that's everything from my side. I just want to thank you for your attention, and I'm going to be here to answer to your questions.
Desde Madrid.
Thank you so much, Rafael, for sharing your experience from Madrid. Now we're going to have a short Q&A session moderated by Dr. Beatriz Cárdenas. Please, Betty, go ahead.
Thank you so much for your the two presentations, Robert and Rafael. I guess that's exactly what we were looking for, to have a perspective on what is the history and what are the options of having these integrated plans. And thank you, Rafael, for giving us a very detailed example of how Madrid has done it and what are the challenges. So I don't see in the meantime what we have some questions. And please, you can raise your hand or type it in the questions section. So I may start first. This is to Robert. Robert, in addition to when you start doing this analysis, this comparative analysis between Mexico City and Madrid, and you came into this structure, how do you see? I mean, it seems like the Madrid case, like having integrated from before it gets into this integrated, and you have the opposite way, and you have two programs, effective, yes, but not as effective as they could be if they are integrated. So how do you see? I mean, do you have any other ideas or any other examples of cities where they have? What is the path that they have followed?
Thanks, Beatriz. These are the two main city examples that I know, and it's a little hard to generalize on. I don't think there is an ideal route or one size fits all. I think just to summarize a couple of the differences, I think in Madrid certainly is an example of an integrated plan, and maybe the Mexico City example has some very interesting elements in it. But I think the fact that they're trying to integrate, they have one stream of work at the city level and another stream of activity at the metropolitan level makes it very difficult, I think, to achieve that integration. And I think that the Mexico City modeling of social impacts is very impressive. I do think that is beyond the capacity of most cities to do, even with local NGO or consulting support. So I think there are elements to take from both, but a generalized best case, I don't think we're there yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And Rafael, based on your knowledge of how other European cities are doing, do you identify any other cities that are going in that pathway of integrated, and who, from your knowledge, think who could be in a good path?
Yeah, and I wouldn't be able to identify specifically one city that I have like this might be an ideal approach for this integration. I think that pretty much at least all large cities, you know, that the European legislation, you have exceedances of air quality concentration levels, you're binded to develop and implement an air quality plan. And I think that all of them, we are talking about many cities are struggling with NO2, for instance. They're taking advantage of that that need to also put that into their climate change plans. But I'm afraid I cannot give a definite answer that this is a very good example of a city that we should look into that. I think it's becoming a standard, even though, you know, the difficulties are many, but I think this is the only way to move forward.
Thank you. There is one question to Rafael, and says, how complicated has been or it is to involve other municipalities that are part of the metropolitan area of Madrid to follow the plans or the guidelines that are in the Plan A. in order to achieve the results that you share with us?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And I know you know that we have 3 levels of administration. We have the national, we have the regional, and we have the local. And very often they belong to, they have different colors in terms of political parties. So it's been extremely difficult, very much, because, and I'm under the impression that it's getting, I mean, and this is maybe it's not a very good news, but I am under the impression that it's becoming increasingly difficult to get people to talk to each other and to agree. The good news is that we have a number of instruments or let's say finding places, common places that we can find each other, because there are some associations or some regulation that affect to some municipalities over, let's say, 50,000 people or things like that. So there are some schemes that makes that easier. But to actually have an understanding, and also there are some other institutions, like for instance, there is a transit authority that is a regional level authority. So for instance, everything that has to do with public transportation is kind of independent body. So that helps a lot, because that's part of that's a very important part of the solution. But in terms of agreement, in terms of policy agendas, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. We also think we managed to move on, because in the end, the national legislation affects everyone. So in the end, we are kind of we need to understand each other, but this is definitely not easy.
Beatriz, may I just add a note, since we're talking
Yes,
about
please.
metropolitan planning? Just the importance of this, I think, should really be underlined when it's really a good effort to try to plan at the metropolitan scale. For example, Rafael mentioned in the transportation sector, to have a coherent system of public transit, you really need to work at the metropolitan scale, so people aren't commuting on a bus for 10 kilometers and then they have to get off and walk a block and get on another public transit system, or so that there's coherence between where you can park and where you can get on a metro system, or coherence between the public transportation system and the roadway network. It's just so important. Also, we haven't talked about climate adaptation, but to try to do, Rafael mentioned nature-based solutions, to try to do wetlands buffers or coherent systems of green space. Working at the metropolitan scale is very important. It's in many countries, it's not very developed to work at this scale, but it is really worth the effort to try, if at all possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. There's one question from Christine. Okay, what this goes to Rafael. What were the measures taken to ensure that data used for analysis and for modeling was validated or is validated?
You mean the inventory?
Yeah, I mean all the data that used for the missions inventory and then used in the model, and I assume that for the model you also have some validation with local monitoring data. Yeah, of course. Well, as for the main input is there are the missions. So as I mentioned, our inventories are based on a standard methodology, which is common for all European countries. So that's the guarantee that our data, our estimations are comparable. And in terms of and also the statistic, another advantage of Madrid is that we have a very strong energy balance that is made every year. So we have very good basic data and statistics on fuel consumptions and things like that. So that helps a lot.
And then the modeling, of course, the modeling is there is a lot of uncertainty in there. We have, of course, evaluated our modeling system against observations, and we have the common, the usual, let's say, biases and errors. And we are talking about, I don't know, confidence level. I mean, to be honest, for instance, in NO2, we might have an uncertainty around, let's say, 30%. In case of PM, that goes well beyond 50%. So of course, this is not like very accurate, but this is what we have. I think this is state of the science. Still, I think that any kind of modeling system, even though it might be not perfect, but it's giving you the necessary confidence on that the action that you are taking are going in the right direction, and also allows you to make a ranking, so you can prioritize what kind of measures can you expect a larger benefit. But yeah, we need to live with uncertainty.
And there is one more question, Rafael, from George Maniki. Just a clarification, was the NO2 reduction driven mainly by reduced emissions from vehicles, or what were other major drivers for this reduction?
Yeah, in the case of NOx, it's pretty much like 75% of the concentration levels are due to local sources. It is also true that the regulated pollutant is NO2. So in the end, depending on how you do the source apportionment, like for instance, background ozone levels make a very important role, and you cannot control that. But anyway, it's in a large percentage, it's up to you. And that, in the case of Madrid, we don't have much industry, we don't have any other very relevant sources, so it's pretty much from the road sector. Road traffic sector, yes.
And following on the data and tools, and just to for knowledge, some of the participants of the community of practice have been, we have to mention the case of Guadalajara metropolitan area, who just recently have an integrated emissions inventory. So you mentioned that, you both mentioned that that's one of the key tools that allows a city to have an integrated plan. And Rafael, you have mentioned like the standardized emissions inventory. Could you comment about, I mean, in addition to have these integrated plans, integrated emissions inventory, do you see any, can you comment about it?
Yeah, about the need of having a common inventory. I think this is was that the question? I think that yeah. Is a must. You need to have a. The good news is that, for instance, the methodology to compile greenhouse gas inventories, we take it from the IPCC, and that is harmonized with that methodology of the IMEP EEA. So that's the good news. In the beginning, I'm talking about 20 years ago, you had both greenhouse gases in both methodologies. I don't know, 10 years ago, greenhouse gases were removed from the IMEP methodology because precisely to avoid any kind of inconsistency. So it was agreed, the methods of calculation was agreed, so they were consistent, and they were reporting in one of the inventories and the guideline. But the thing is, in the end, the methods are exactly the same, are perfectly compatible. In the case of Mexico, I don't know, you have a standard for making your inventories. Maybe sometimes I've seen in the US that they include Mexico in their inventories because for obvious reason that they need to model air quality, and Mexico is an important part of that. I don't know if you're using the EPA methodology, but I'm pretty sure that there are methods to compile a consistent greenhouse gas emission inventory.
Okay, and I guess we just have time for just one more question, again from Christine Moutier. In effort to reduce greenhouse gases that are contributed emitted by industries, what challenges did you face working with business and civil society?
Well, as I mentioned, we don't have much of a problem with industry, but it's a tricky sector because there are many uses and some CO2 emissions in industry that are very difficult to tackle because in some cases electricity won't do. Like for instance, generating steam or process steam, things like that. And so it's a tricky sector. But let's say, luckily in Madrid, we don't have much industry, so everything comes from outside, including the electricity. So we don't have that problem. But yeah, I agree that it is a key factor. It's a key sector. I think it's the main measures in industry are first fuel switch, and then energy efficiency, and in the end electrification as much as you can. But this is this is like general thought. We need to consider the specifics of what kind of industry are we talking about, what are the reality in a particular city. So it's very important to, as mentioned, and as Robert mentioned, that there are no recipes that might work everywhere.
Well, thank you. I guess we were over this session. Thank you so much, Robert and Rafael. Back to you, Ceci.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for having attended to this Q&A session. Now we're coming to our second piece of our presentation. We have Huanti and Zhang, who is Director of Environmental Management, lead of WRI. She has more than 20 years of experience in climate change and other green aspects in China. She will tell us about WRI work in China to climate change and air quality. Zhang, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you, everybody. Just give me one minute. I need to. Okay, so thank you for inviting me for this very interesting and very fruitful meeting. Just a very quick share of what is happening in China right now. And it is kind of national level, there is a requirement and development of integration, management of pollution and climate. Okay, thank you. So very quick is that in the past 20 years, it's kind of that carbon reduction and air pollution, they are separate. As Professor Robert just mentioned, that it's kind of the first step or the second step they do, although there are many common things in the management, but they are separate in different ministries and they just support each other's result. But starting from last year, there is a change in the management. And first, in China, we integrated into the whole environmental protection management procedure. That is, for example, here is GHGs, and not only be combined with air, but with the water treatment emission. And also solid waste treatment emission. So it's kind of in the past, it's, here is the carbon plus pollution, because we regard that most of the emission are coming with the same route and the same process for energy production, for traffic, and for industry. So there are many parts that can cover each other. On the other hand, there is a very important idea right now in China is that we put, although this is a synergy, there is an integration, but when we call it in Chinese, first we say it's the reduction of pollution, and then at the same time it's the carbon reduction. Why we talk like this is that it's kind of a balance, because still we are in developing period, and equity development is very important for pollution. kind of locally, and it affects public health in the management and development. Okay, that is from in the year of 2021, about from the early year, and in China there are many very high level management document initiated the requirement and also answer how we integrated these two topics together. And right now we call it, there are totally 4 pillars for the integration. And the first pillar is the highest pillar. That's the kind of regulation and emission standards and some technical guidance. The second pillar is we use some economic policy and a market mechanism to combine it together. And this one is administrative management. And since in daily management, this is a very common happened issue. And I also would like to share one additional information is that why in China we combined it together, and right now it is the Ministry of Environmental Protection in charge of be responsible for the integration management, because in the past there in the ministry MEEE, we call it MEEE, we already have a pretty mature management system and mechanism and related team. So it will not add too much cost, too much administrative management cost combined together. So that is another benefit. So the last pillar is science and technology. Yeah, I hope that in the future I can get more chances to share with you more details of how we combine it together. Here is just a very, very brief scheme of these 4 pillars. Under these 4 pillars, what right now China is doing. For example, in the environmental protection law, we described that GHG are part of, are together be managed with other pollutants. And we also have a special permit act. It's kind of, although it's not regulation, but it's similar. It's similar to regulation. We are trying to push the GHG requirement in the permit of pollution. And for example, in the industry emission standards for the heavy pollution and heavy CO2 emission industry, we already in the process of putting GHG emission requirement into the traditional industry pollutants emission standards to focus on is be combined into the daily administrative management. For example, permit. In the past, the permit is for pollutants, and we have a special permit platform, and all those emphasize the fixed source, fixed emission source. They are managed in permit, and right now we are going to combine it into the application of permit. Also put CO2 emission requirement into this, and also based on this platform, we have our inventory, and in the we are already in the process of putting CO2 or other GHGs in the inventory. And for example, for air quality monitoring, we are trying to do some it's kind of pilot project to see the real monitoring of GHGs and what would be the result. And for science and technology part, science research is always the focus of all the policy making and the management. And right now we are putting this into the traditional science research. Another thing I want to pay special attention to is the use of big data and IT platform. In the past, in China, we already established a very, we call it smart environmental management, and that is based on science research monitoring data and IT platform, and we combine it into kind of policy making supporting system. And now we are putting CO2 also into this platform. And for the economical and the market ways, for example, we already have the pollutants emission trade system, and we also have a carbon emission trade system. And we are thinking whether it would be possible to combine these two trade systems together. Another idea is that for the permit, and together with carbon emission trade system, whether we can connect this together to make sure that all the emphasized emission source can be under management. Sure, we also have involve green finance and carbon finance together. And also for the emission information disclosure, just last year, MEE released a requirement that in the past is only an information disclosure of traditional pollutants, but from this year on, the CO2 emission information is also required to be disclosed. So this is all these 4 pillars. Under all these 4 pillars, the whole process, the public participation is very active. And right now we are just in the process of trying to explore how to combine this the pollutants management and GHG management, and still in the process, maybe within 1 or 2 years we can have some more clear ideas. And right now in WRI China office, we already have 2 separate projects. One is especially about how we integrate these 2 management into our environment impact assessment system and into our permit system, and how to connect the emission trade system together with permit. Okay, so this is my very brief share. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Huanti, por tu exposición.
Thank you, Huanti, for your kind presentation. So now we have our last speaker, who is a PhD in environmental science, and also she is she's working for sub-Saharan cities. Her name is Andriannah, and she will tell us about her experience in Africa, as well as policy integration and air quality. Andriannah, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Beatriz, for the introduction, and to talk to how we can integrate air pollution and climate change in Africa. I would like to focus on a sector that is often not getting much attention, the waste management sector. And in doing so, I'd like to introduce to you open waste banning in Africa, and start to look at this if it's an opportunity to limit air pollution, to look at reducing climate change emissions, and as well as enhance livelihoods. This presentation is on behalf of myself and Professor Desta. We are together seconded to the United Nations High-Level Climate Champions by the Royal Academy of Engineering, as well as Lloyd's Register Foundation. They did an initial global scanning to understand what are the dangers in terms of safety in dealing with processes and products at the end of life. And they realized, in fact, open waste banning is a big challenge in a lot of developing countries, specifically in the region of Africa. So what I would want to present to you is actually initial results from a report that we have compiled as a request through a consultation process. So this report is a knowledge product that we've created. It creates the summary report on open waste banning, and then it actually starts to inform setting goals and targets of how you would eliminate or phase out open waste banning. And then we start to call on the community of practice to have a commitment to action, and then multi-stakeholder partnership so that we can tackle phasing out of open waste banning. But before I go into that, I would like to give you key messages from this report to start understanding the interaction between climate change and air pollution, where waste and in the mismanagement of waste, specifically open waste banning, is concerned. So the key messages, what I want you to understand is that globally, we generate over 2 billion tons of municipal waste a year. Now, out of that, and perhaps you've been following the debate about plastic, 12% of that global waste is actually plastic. Sub-Saharan Africa as a region only produces 9% of waste. But the bad news is that it might seem less than 10%, but it is actually predicted to triple or even quadruple in some regions in Africa because it is experiencing very fast growth. Now, the waste composition in Africa is quite interesting, and it answers that question about emissions, therefore air pollution and climate change. More than 60% of waste generated in Africa in urban centers is biodegradable, and about 20% of it is recyclable. So really, it should not be ending up in waste dumps and being openly banned. But the reason why it's doing so is actually because there's such little waste coverage services in sub-Saharan Africa. In the urban centers, there's already inequality between urban centers and rural areas. There's also inequality in services between richer and poorer communities. There's inequalities in services in terms of not only households, but also in terms of gender. So in the case of Africa, there's only sometimes this is the only way to deal with waste is to ban it. So only 11% of the waste is disposed of properly in designed and sanitary landfills. That means more than 60% of the waste is actually dumped in uncontrolled landfills and open dump sites. But the good news again as well is about 10% of the waste is recycled, and specifically by the informal waste service providers and waste pickers. But unmanaged waste or improperly managed waste, if you look at that diagram, it shows you what happens with that waste, be it coming from the municipal waste or healthcare waste, construction debris, used car tires, electronic equipment, used batteries. It's dumped and often banned. If it is banned, it means that it ends up either contributing towards diseases and spread of infectious pathologies. It also sometimes ends up as marine litter, water, soil, and of course the reason here, air pollution, and the last one is global warming. But the informal recycling, I would like to think it as at the center of this in Africa, because these are the workers that actually deal with waste in Africa. So because of this mismanagement of waste, both here in Africa and other regions, emissions from solid waste driven by open dumps and landfills accounts for up to 12% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So in terms of thinking about short-lived climate pollutants, 20% of global methane can be attributed to organic waste that is dumped. Then open burning of waste actually accounts for 11% of black carbon. So unlike what the previous speaker talked about in terms of focus, how can we pivot this focus where even as I'm talking about greenhouse gases, you have to understand that in terms of the entire continent, the contribution to global greenhouse gas emissions estimated is about 4%. So how can we pivot the focus for African countries to include pollutants that can deal with greenhouse, that contribute towards warming as well as health, so that we can take action that combines both? So open burning in itself contributes about 29% of fine particulate matter, which means if you look at 1.2 million premature deaths in Africa, talking about health, it comes from air pollution, the premature deaths, and a lot of that can be attributed to waste. How much of it is not exactly quantified, and I guess that's the challenge. There's a big information gap. So if we look globally again, not having the statistics or data for Africa, but acute respiratory infections in children. So if you're dealing with air pollution, such as particulate matter, then you're looking at reducing acute respiratory infections in children. If you look at uncontrolled burning in waste, it's costing over 270,000 premature deaths, last estimated in 2016. The emissions of many air pollutants, in fact, have been shown, which is the last global assessment that did the estimation on open waste burning, was Wiedenmeyer in 2014. And even then, she showed how underestimated the emissions from open waste burning are. But really, there is no speaking to the cost of health, and we don't really know the figures for Africa, but what we do know is that low-income countries such as the ones in Africa have higher municipal budgets than well-developed countries. Now, to drive home the economic case for dealing with waste or the mismanagement of waste, 70 to 80% of municipal waste generated in Africa is recyclable, and the economic value of burning it is actually 8 billion per annum that is lost in burning that waste. But what we do need is to have a paradigm shift. So in understanding how we are changing, pivoting back to air pollution and climate change where mismanagement of waste is concerned, is to understand that we can, all the different pathways often look at the end of the waste, which is where the waste ends up in landfills. But really we need to understand how we can reduce at source, recycle and convert before it ends up in landfills so that it's less waste that is ending up at that point. So in compiling this report, we are looking at not only just putting the report and putting the information forward as requested by partners, but it's to launch a multi-partnership of commitment to phase out open burning of waste from Africa by 2040. Now, in doing so, we are using the fact that it is contributing to greenhouse gases, short-lived climate pollutants, as well as pollutants that cause multiple health, illnesses, premature death, and environmental damage. We already have a partnership of African governments and cities and various other partners, including civil societies, the informal sector, but also very crucially, the development partners who would contribute towards financing of this very complex infrastructure that is required to deal with mismanagement of waste and phase out open burning. We are actually participating in various key moments, including the Afri-Cities Summit that is upcoming in May, African Climate Week, which are regional platforms, as well as the African Ministerial Conference. But the end point is to raise this awareness as we head towards COP27, which, as you know, will be hosted in Africa, in Egypt. But support is needed to bring on key development partners and financing institutions to join these partnerships. Now, if I want to stop here and allow. Yes, sir, thank you. So I want to stop here rather than going on to the next slide and give a chance for more discussions. But we've identified not only the systems changes, but what are the overall treatment technologies that are there, pathways towards the systems change, and the pillars that can be used to deal with phasing out open burning and mismanagement of waste, as we look at it through the lens of air pollution, climate change, public health, sustainable livelihoods. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Andriannah. Y bueno, con esta presentación se cierran las
Thank you,
ponencias.
Andriannah, so much. With this presentation, we close the second section of our session. Now we are going to open once again another Q&A session hosted by Dr. Beatriz. Please, Beatriz.
Thank you, Huanti and Andriannah, for your presentations. I guess I think that you gave the other part of what we saw in the first session, that is possible. There are some efforts going at national level in China. That's great, Huanti. It's a great news, and we hope that many other countries follow that trend. And in terms of a very key example of how to integration of air quality, climate change, and health, and that Andriannah gave us in waste burning. So I would like to ask this question, to Huanti. If you think of a sector in which you will think that in the very close term, you will see that integration, what sector do you see?
Good question. In fact, you know that in China, our energy structure are mainly, for example, coal. So you know, energy, the coal fire in China is absolutely number one action, but it doesn't mean that for other countries it will be the same. And at the same time, why we call it the integration of pollution and carbon emission reduction, that is because the development of industry. So that is the key for economy development. So in China, the industry development is very important to have local economy and also have enough financial support for public health or public education for equity development. So industry, in fact, are regarded as the the equal importance of energy production of coal-fire. But in fact, if it is for the pollution part, for example, in the past, for coal-fire is only maybe mainly SO2 and NOx years to reduce SO2 and NOx. But now ozone and PM 2.5 and VOCs are so serious, and this emission from industry part, together with some from traffic, is complex. It's complex. So at this stage, on the one hand, we want to continue our development for economy, but on the other hand, we are trying to reduce the carbon emission. If personally, I would think that the industry need to be paid special attention to, especially for countries if it's not like coal-fire so much. Sure, traffic is also important.
Yeah.
It's just that, it's just that traffic, there are so many cars, and by industry, we can manage it into, for example, permit, and much easier relatively. But one good question is that what is happening in African countries, the open burning of waste in the past years it had been similar. But although right now is gradually better and better, but still for GHGs, the integration management, the solid waste treatment, important part.
Thank you. There is one question for Andriannah. Are there any difference between capital cities and secondary cities in waste management practice?
Yes, for me.
So,
hi.
So what are the opportunities for improving waste management, Andriannah?
Thank you so much, Beatriz, and for the person who's put the question. Actually, I was very encouraged to see solid waste management in your triangle. So I'm seeing a lot of similarities already in the way that you're focusing and where it is. And I think I've come from the transport sector. In fact, I started off by quantifying transport emissions. And I realized it's an easier sell always than waste. Nobody wants to talk about waste. No one wants to quantify it. It's complex. The emissions are really complex. It's like you've said about transport can be permitted, industry can be permitted. How do you give permissions for burning in your backyard, which is often what happens, including the waste dumps? So, but the question, the question on secondary cities is very important. Part of that urbanization trend in Africa, where we're saying it's the fastest growing urbanization trend in the world, population growth is often not happening in the main cities. It's also happening in the secondary cities and urban centers. And those are often mushrooming unplanned. So whatever the statistics I gave you for urban centers and the rural area, you have to think that the secondary cities will be worse. So in fact, at the AfriCity Summit, they will be focusing on secondary cities specifically for that reason. The challenge that we have in terms of lack of regulation, lack of institution, financial support, as well as understanding all these things and how the secondary cities receive less attention. Yet the challenge is there already. And if you look going forward to 2030, 2050, the challenge will only grow in those areas. So thank you very much for the question.
Well, I guess we got into the time, so thank you so much. And Ceci, back to you. Please ask your questions, and maybe Andriannah and Pontian could answer those later. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Sí, antes de finalizar,
So prior to closing the session, now everybody has access now to their own camera. So if you please can you switch your camera on? This is only for the purpose of having a group photo, please. So there you are.
¿Listos? Bueno, muchas gracias. Listo, ahora sí, perfecto. Pues gracias a todos nuestros panelistas.
So I want to thank all our speakers today, all our guest speakers for having also shared comments, and hopefully the shared information today is for your own interest and that we continue to create our community of practice. We will meet once again in our next session. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you, everybody.